Hello, my name is Aydin. I'm a professor of special education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And my research is about, I'm a social scientist and I'm studying how multiple stakeholders, local stakeholders in school communities with diverse interests, goals, histories, and often those goals and histories may be opposing, can come together and engage in decision-making, collective decision-making, systemic analysis, and future making. And I'm just trying to develop processes through which local stakeholders can develop their own inclusive, democratic decision-making processes.
You're Turkish, aren't you, Aydin? Can you just give us a little bit of background?
Of course, of course. Yes, I'm Turkish. I was born and raised in Turkey, and I received my degrees in Turkey in psychology. So I started as a clinical psychologist in Turkey, worked with historically marginalized communities over there, but also trauma survivors at hospitals and schools. Then I came to the United States to receive my graduate and doctorate degrees, and I received my master's and doctorate degrees at Arizona State University in education. So I have two hats in social science, two types of trainings. One is in education, other one is psychology, and I see them as connected as I'm using more like applied psychology models for addressing inequalities in education system.
How did you come to chat cultural historical activity theory?
Of course. So in my training, and it was very Anglo-Saxon traditional psychological training. So behaviorism, cognitive behaviorism, and I have another life, which is more about art and social movements, social activism and political movements. So they were two separate activities, almost like. And I want to be a good scientist, but also I had interest in the systemic transformation, social transformation, and social movements, but they were two separate. So psychological theories were not addressing and understanding, encapsulating these social movements. When I started to work in education in the United States, I started also my social activism over there. I work as a part of the Amnesty International and work with the refugee resettlement agencies. So that was my social movement, social activity kind of sense. And my training was still in this very traditional realm. How can we understand what's wrong with individuals, what's great about individuals, identifying, remedying, all the traditional track of the Western traditional psychological training. And I was good at it, but somehow they were two separate realms again. Still, that psychology I'm learning, education I'm learning is not capturing this messy, complex, dynamic nature of everyday realities and how people find themselves in this kind of very complex realities while they are engaging their agencies' wills, but they find themselves this context that they didn't choose. So they are negotiating, orchestrating, and my arts and social movements, social activism were just utilizing that and focusing on that everyday realities with all the complexities, messy nature, but also all the possibilities. But science wasn't capturing that. So in my PhD, my advisor, Alfredo Artivas, introduced me to cultural historical activity theory. So first, reading the Michael Cole, mostly American and the European roots of the cultural historical activity theory, not Vygotsky at the time. So I came to study, understand cultural historical activity theory through Michael Cole, but also Yuri Engelstrom. So their writings, and along with the other social, what in US called the social cultural theorists like Scribner, Barbara Rogoff, Chris Gutierrez, and of course I started to read also Ray McDermott and Frederick Erickson, then Dorothy Holland. All tradition just somehow gave me the sense that we can still engage in this kind of robust high quality scientific exploration and moving into this kind of human context interaction, which I was desperately trying to look for. So where I can find tools and understandings of this kind of artful and practical, political nature of the human life, and understanding those, again, the human context interaction and all the possibilities. So that was my introduction to culture historical activity.
Tell us about some of your favorite or most successful projects.
Of course, but before that, that's another route. So I've been reading Marx, I've been reading Engels, I've been reading Hegel, I've been reading those philosophical exploration. That's another European tradition we have. And in the US also, unfortunately, when I came to US, I noticed that academia is very commercialized, very capitalistic, and very siloed. So most unfortunately, for example, psychologists are not reading the philosophy. Psychologists or educators are not aware of the outside of their expertise. So cultural historical activity theory almost like helped me to go back to my roots. So after Cole and Gestrom, all of those traditions, the new generation, later generations of the cultural historical activity theory, I started to read, the Leontief, Luria, Vygotsky, Ilyenko, Davidov, and of course your work. All of those different traditions in Russia, in Europe, also in South America, in the global South, Australia. So that helped me to go back to my philosophical roots. So in a way, the cultural historical activity theory helped me to connect all this, my philosophical, practical, and scientific exploration in the same path. So that gave me some kind of holistic experience, which is more apt for me to understand the world, because as I mentioned, that the world is very complex, it's very messy, it's changing, and we are a part of it. So cultural historical activity theory is just a great platform for me, almost like an anchor for me to put my foot in one area and explore the other possibilities. So theater, for example, Bertolt Brecht has been always important influence for me. Now I look at the Bertolt Brecht from a different perspective. And when I utilize some of the ideas from the Bertolt Brecht, plus a distanciation effect or alienation effect, what they call it also, in my research. So this was a perfect medium for me to bring this kind of scientific or social science with this kind of political, social, artful part of the human life. In terms of my work okay, so I have worked in prisons, I have worked in hospitals, and I worked in schools. And my whole professional life, I have been working with historically marginalized communities in Turkey, in Sudan, in Russian Federation, and most importantly, I work with communities, social movements that are trying to understand the context they found, the issues they are facing, and creating solutions to that. I'm very interested in that area. So as a scientist, my focus is that, how people can come together and generate ecologically valid, relevant knowledge based on their interests, diverse, often opposing interests, histories, goals, and engage in problem solving, engage in decision making, engage in future making, so they can create a new world. And my research is not about giving them solutions or writing a book so that will solve everything, but my approach is to facilitate that democratic knowledge production, democratic future-making processes. So my theoretical approach is a social justice project, but it's very different than the traditional, like a Rawls social justice project, which is focusing on the distribution of resources, like a distributive justice. If everyone is getting the same outcomes, everyone is getting the same resources. I just want to go a little bit further, and I want to focus on participatory justice. So in school systems, in the United States, my work has been started in the United States, is about the issue is this: historically marginalized communities, racialized communities, including African American, Latinx, most specifically also Native American students, have been receiving negative educational outcomes and negative educational opportunities or experience in schools. So that was my starting point. Why African American students are placed in special education for behavioral problems more disproportionately, while American Indian students are receiving suspension, expulsion more disproportionately. So basically, my entry point into the system is racialization of behavioral problems in schools. Okay, racialization of behavioral problems in schools. I conceptualize that as a systemic adaptive problem. It's a symptom of the larger structural issues in a country called the United States, which is built on capitalism, slavery, and settler colonialism. That issue has historical, cultural, organizational roots. But that's my entry point. So in my research, I'm focusing on that. But in my intervention called Learning Lab, which is inspired by the formative intervention methodology developed by Yuri Engström and his colleagues at University of Helsinki and the University of Tampere. So they have developed this model called formative intervention. So I adapted that model into US context to examine and address the issue of racialization of behavioral problems in US schools. And we implement, since 2011, we implement an intervention called Learning Lab, okay? So we have been implementing Learning Lab at 11 schools in public schools, and we have also, let me see the numbers, 5 schools in Indiana, 1 school in Kansas are planning to implement Learning Labs, and also we have 1 school in Rio, Brazil, a special education school implementing Learning Lab. So that's our project. Again, we have a large research team, and every time when we work in a school community, we always change our research team composition. So we have a very diverse international community of scholars in our research center called CRPBIS. But every time when we work with a community, a specific local school community, we work on building a coalition. So before we start implementing an intervention, at least 1 or 2 years before, we start working with that community, build a coalition. So what we try to do is plant a seed for systemic transformation. We try to identify the perfect condition for us, which is a school community experiencing racial disparities, but willing to address those racial disparities and experiencing this kind of systemic contradiction, right? This kind of imbalance. So there are lots of systemic symptoms are coming up, like disturbances, conflicts, dilemmas, producing those things, but they are not too dysfunctional, right? So if they are too dysfunctional, it may not be the right place. We work with the school community and we say, would you like to work with us? If they are interested in working with us, or sometimes they reach out to us because we have been publishing quite a bit, and they say, we would like to work with you. And we have 2 things we ask from them, school leaders, 2 things. One, if they are willing to open the decision-making process to local stakeholders, other local stakeholders, which means if they are willing to share the power, decision-making power with teachers, paraprofessionals, support staff, and families, community members, and students. And if they say yes, then we say, okay, this is the intervention we are going to do. Basically, this community called Learning Lab is going to come together, analyze the issue they are facing, extent of the problem, engage in root cause analysis, historical and empirical analysis. Then they are going to look at the systemic analysis, map out the existing system. Then they design the future, the ideal system in their head, which is more inclusive, more positive, more supportive, and addressing the needs, interests, and ingenuity, joy of all students, all communities. So then they finish the design phase. That's the first year or first phase of Learning Lab. And in the second phase, they implement the new system. So basically, they look at the existing system, behavioral support system, school discipline system, which reproduce and maintain that disproportionate outcomes for certain students, right? Which creates those kind of systemic contradictions. So once they analyze collectively, reconstruct that whole system collectively from multiple perspectives, multiple points of view, multiple histories. Students are seeing the system from one angle. Parents are seeing from another angle based on their social capital, cultural capital, backgrounds. Administrators are seeing from different angles. They get together, create this systemic map, right? So basically, they are making that infrastructure, school system, organization visible, hence transferable. And they design the new system. In the second phase, they implement this new system. So we ask the administrators, school leaders, say, okay, you are willing to share the power with this, open up this decision-making process, make it more democratic, make it more inclusive. But whatever this group is going to create, the new system is going to be implemented in the second year, next academic year. So we want to give a sense of two things. One, an organizational memory, a sense of accomplishment, sense of inclusive democracy can work and it can be practical. So a sense of justice cannot be separated from effectiveness or sustainability. So a system is going to be feasible, it's going to work, but at the same time, it's going to create this kind of just outcomes. How are you going to maintain that? That's the second part. Organizational memory of inclusive decision making. Learning Lab, we are going to lead that process over there. So now they can take the Learning Lab. If they want to make another decision, if they are going to engage in another kind of important decisions about their school community, they can use, adapt, and appropriate this Learning Lab process. So first year they design, or the first part of the Learning Lab, they design the new system. Second year, they implement the new system. And the third year, they are working on institutionalizing this way of inclusive decision-making, but also institutionalizing learning from their own communities. So the students can teach the system. We have a wonderful teacher doing great things in one school, one classroom. We don't learn from them. We have great practitioners who are doing great things, but we don't learn from them. And as you know, and the formal schools are not designed, formed to transform this education for society. It's not for social mobility, it's for reproduction. If our society is racist, our schools will reproduce racism. If our society is ableist, our schools are designed to reproduce ableism. Our society is sexist, schools are going to reproduce sexism, which means status quo or the original design of the schools are over there to reproduce inequality, right? So, which means we go to school every day as teachers, parents, administrators, we reproduce this system which is not designed for all. This system designed to reproduce the interests, goals, ideas, and the power of the dominant groups, right? When we try to challenge that, disrupt that, we need to be as systematic, as strategic as they are, right? So we want to show this inclusive decision-making can be effective, productive, and we can have concrete outcomes, concrete systems. So we are not interested in changing the minds of the individuals. We are not interested in changing the perspectives of individuals so that the white people are going to understand African-American experience and they are going to do the right thing. What we are saying, actually, what we are thinking in our research, you cannot be functional in a dysfunctional system. You cannot be anti-racist in a racist system. So the idea is a little bit different than the British model of philosophy, which is like Hume's and others are focusing on the individual cognition, right? Competency comes after cognition, right? First cognition, then competency. We reverse that. We say competence, then cognition. So that's why we want people to make their future, but engage in this kind of critical dialogue. They can share their experiences, they can share their pains, they can share their ideas, but whatever they are going to talk is going to turn into a systemic transformation. So when parents are coming over there, we are not wasting their time, we are not wasting their hope. When the communities are working with us, we are not just going to waste their resources, their hopes, their dreams. We just want to go over there and make sure that that systemic transformation is going to take place, and we are going to scaffold them outside in. I think I'm telling so much things, Andy. Please just jump in and ask questions.
I'll ask some questions now. In one of these projects, which I heard you talk about and read about, a thing that struck me is that the community groups, the representatives of the indigenous families involved, started with the question of discipline. Why were their kids being disciplined? Now, any school community or leader, you'd think, well, say that's just a symptom, an outcome of their bad learning, their bad behaviour. Obviously, the indigenous families saw it the other way around. Can you explain how that came about?
Of course. So this is the project, what we call Indigenous Learning Lab. So as I said, we have been implementing learning labs, and this learning lab design, the process, again, we were inspired by the Yuri Engelstrom's formative intervention, but just formative intervention and this cultural historical activity asked us to make those tools relevant to local context, ecological validity. We are following that lead. So we work in this project, Indigenous Learning Lab. My colleague, Erin Burt-Bear, and I have been working with a tribal community in the northern Wisconsin as a part of the Ojibwe people, Anishinaabe people, Ojibwe people. So this is a large tribe, and they have different tribal governments as a part of this nation. So they are in the northern Wisconsin, and this school is a high school, right? In a rural context, it's a high school receiving students from middle schools, 6-7 different districts, 6-7 different cities, and also this reservation, tribal reservation, Ojibwe reservation. Okay, school is located in the city, which is a touristic hub, but also it's a hub for anti-Indian or anti-indigenous community movement. It's a very segregated place, right? We have very wealthy white community members. We have also some poor community members, but also this indigenous community have been attacked and their rights have been violated in the city. And there are lots of hate groups over here. So this is a very contentious place. Let me give you the context because that will be more understanding, I guess. So in 1990s, early 1990s, don't forget this place in the United States, maybe for those who don't understand or don't know about the United States, in the United States, education and schools have been used to eradicate and assimilate American Indian students. So in the United States, settler colonialism took different phases. First one was the genocide. Almost 96% of all indigenous communities in Americas were killed. That's a big genocide. The second phase is resettlement. Resettlement meaning they just took the lands of the American indigenous communities. In the United States, most specifically, they moved them different places, they made treaties, and they broke the treaties, American government, US government, and then at the end, these communities have been relocated. The third phase is assimilation of their culture. So they use school, US government has been using schools, what they call the Indian schools, to take the American Indian students outside of their homes, take out of their cultures, out of their homes and families, and put them in these kind of institutional segregated schools where their hairs were cut, their language were banned, and actually, matter of fact, up until 1970s, as my colleague Erin Burt-Bear mentioned, it was illegal for American Indians to speak their own language. So it was a banned language. Their culture was seen as the enemy, and their language were banned. This took place till 1970. So in this city, there were Indian schools where those students, the grandfathers, fathers of these students who are attending that schools were basically tortured, physically, emotionally, culturally tortured, and in those schools. So schooling has been this kind of very negative connotations in the minds and history of the American Indians. So 1990s, there was a bit discussion about the treaty rights, and white settlers were fighting against the rights of the American Indian community's fishing rights. And they were going to do these fishing landing places on the lake. It's a beautiful place. There are lots of lakes. But these white demonstrators in 1990s were going and chanting, yelling those racist terms like the kill an Indian, save the fish, those kind of horrific chanting and demonstrations, and throwing beer bottles, rocks at those people, American Indian families who are fishing. This is their traditional cultural practice, by the way, and it's livelihood. So one of the Learning Lab member who attended our Learning Lab said, so we were getting those things. At that time, he was a high school student at this same high school, what we call the Northwoods High School. So he said, on Sunday, we were getting those horrific, degrading chants, rock bottles. They are throwing all of those horrific stuff. They are violating, physically hurting us. And on Monday, we are coming to school, sitting in a classroom, math class, and seeing our teacher was one of those people who are demonstrating against us. Think about this story, okay? So that school has been trying to, since in the last 2 decades, that school trying to rebuild the relationship between the tribal government, the community, and their school. So they try different things. They try to be more visible in the reservation, which is 30 miles away from the school. So American Indian students are getting their education in elementary, preschool, elementary school, middle school in this community where they are the majority. Their language, their culture were honored. Their teachers were American Indian mostly. Their teachers are American Indian mostly. And comes to high school, they are bused into this high school, which is a site of suffering, okay? So, but the school is trying to reach out this community. Erin and I have been visiting different schools serving American Indian communities because we have this project. And we have this learning lab. We want to extend to American Indian communities, schools serving American Indian communities. We visited several schools and we found this school, and we found the leadership is willing to share the power with the American Indian community about the school, and want to address racial disproportionality because school has had 25% American Indian students, 75% white settler students, and 25% of the American Indian students were receiving 60% of suspension, expulsion, detention, those exclusionary disciplinary practices. And if you look at academically, American Indian students were doing worse than their white counterparts, right? So there were disparities. That's our entry point. They want to address those disparities. They want to build the communication, connection with the native tribal government and the community, and they were willing to share the power, right? Then the second phase was they want to change the system and create a new system. So that was a perfect place for us. But, and the VUs could also, again, this is the US. So you cannot take the intervention design in some another country and place into US. And we are dealing with the racial disparities. Race is a very heavy, very complex, and very violent subject. Just like Frantz Fanon said, racism is very violent. If you try to be anti-racist or address racism, it's going to be violent, right? So we need to be very critical. So in addition to cultural historical activity theory, in Indigenous Learning Lab, we utilize decolonizing methodologies. We studied the indigenous communities, scholars, their knowledge about the indigenous education. We studied the practices and the theories about decolonization. We also bring the critical race theory. Critical race theory is, again, right now under attack in the current US education system. But basically—
To that end, Aydin, could you give a simple and clear explanation of what you get from critical race theory? Because, as you say, it's under attack and it's misrepresented. So could you just briefly explain this to us?
Of course. Critical race theory is coming from legal studies, and they were trying to basically focus on the historical context of racism. and systemic roots of the racism, in simple terms. And there are different elements of the critical race theory. We have wonderful scholars who utilize critical race theory in education. Gloria Lassendeling, William Tate, all of those great scholars. So one idea we use, I gave this example, one idea we use is the interest conversion. So systemic roots and interest conversion. So we took the racism is not some kind of psychological residue of the long gone era, like the racist era, slavery, and racism is in the head of the individuals. If we change the individuals' minds, if we make them aware of their racist tendencies, they are going to change their practice. That was the general understanding of the educational interventions against racism. But critical race theory is saying, look, you need to look at the legal procedures. You need to look at the organizational structure. You need to look at history, which is also similar to cultural historical activity theory, historicizing the issues, right? People may have individual tendencies, cognitive biases, all of those things, but which comes first, right? Which is more important and which is more impactful is the system, right? Systemic racism is reproducing those practices, those activities, those systems, organizations. So critical race theory, as you mentioned, that starting point is the system and history, right? And the end point is hopefully to change the systems, hence the behaviors and the consequences of the system. So they say, critical race theories, I learned one thing very important. I was saying that, and coming back to your point, I didn't forget your question, Andy. So the starting point was disproportionality, disproportionate outcomes in school discipline system. So interest conversion is this. So in US education theories and psychology, idea was specifically about organizational change is this. People are going to come together. Everyone is going to be on the same page. We are going to create a harmony, and they are going to create a better system. That never happens. As cultural historical activity theories and Marx and the followers are showing us, systems are going to reproduce those contradictions. Any system, there is no best system. Systems are moving in the history, and they naturally create those contradictions. And there are natural tendencies for different communities to pull and push, that power struggle, right? Power is almost like a gravity. And systems are changing, power are just moving them all here, shifting. So for us, we didn't expect the principals of the school, administrators of schools to be just anti-racist. They want to change everything, the colonials. We didn't expect them to be at that level, right? We didn't expect them to have the same goals with the American Indian communities. Even within the American Indian communities, we didn't expect everyone to have the same goals, objectives, right? We are not waiting for this kind of coming together harmony. What we did actually, for example, that's why I think we are successful being at the school, because it's very hard to get into school system and do interventions, specific something like formative interventions. I think our success is starting point of that assumption, interest conversion. So principals were interested in changing their system because their system is not producing good outcomes for all students, which make them look bad in the eye of the district, in the eye of the state governments, right? And if the district is disproportionate, which means if a district found disproportionate according to our federal law, if a district is found disproportionate in special education and discipline, they have to spend 15% of their federal funding in remedying. So basically it's financial interests over there, right? They want to do, and also they want to do sometimes right things. They want to be on the right side of the history, right? There are different interests. So communities, they are willing to move past those kind of horrific history and change the school system for their kids, but all kids as well. So that's why the starting point was, and the most visible systemic contradiction and most consequential systemic contradiction, which is the racial disproportionality in school discipline.
You'd be aware of how Mike Cole's group came to Fifth Dimension, that their first efforts actually was to go into schools and observe how the teachers were trying to teach and to try and change that. And basically, they couldn't do it. The teachers wouldn't have them there. So they did what was only available to them, basically to set up outside school with an after-school program that the kids could attend voluntarily, and then sought support from different community groups to run side by side with the school. And then he's achieved wonderful things that way. You've taken the opposite approach, but fully aware of all the difficulties and antagonisms around what you were trying to achieve. You've made it your goal to change the school, and you haven't appealed to the government or placed demands on the headmaster to change. You've actually mobilized the community to, if you like, go into the school and change it. That's the hard road, isn't it? Tell me about that choice.
Of course. I mean, those experiments like Michael Cole's, even Chris Gutierrez, my Leadership Institute, among others, you know, my advisor Alfredo Artilis' work, they have great possibilities. They show great possibilities. So I learned from them a lot, along with the other interventions. So this work cannot be done alone. It's not my individual work. It's the collective work. It's the community's work. I think this is also cultural historical activity theory's one insight. You don't own the knowledge. You just turn into stewardship. Also, this is what we learn, which means I'm the steward of this knowledge. In terms of coming back to school, you're right, Andy. We thought this was a social movement or organizational structural change. So I think, again, in education, in psychology, our focus is very individual. Even with the collectives, we don't appreciate this complex notion of the organizational system transformation. So what we try to do is this. We learn, we study this organizational change, systemic transformation. We read widely from organizational sciences, we read widely from information sciences to understand this massive thing called organizations, right? I also read economy, I also read legal studies, but mostly biology too. So I'm just trying to see these complexities of the system, right? And my entry point, again, I think my work has been successful. It was adapted, taken into different contexts. So he was focused on the after-school programs. I want to get into the eye of the storm in the system. So my assumption, again, this is a priori assumption, is that to be able to change the system, we need to in the system. And there are lots of dynamics and interests and groups who are interested in changing the system, but we need to find the right element. But to be able to do that, you're right, Andy, it takes years. For this Indigenous Learning Lab project, it took 2 years for us to build this community. We worked with the state government, state education agency. We met with the education leaders in the state education agency who are interested in systemic change, have been investing in this kind of American Indian educational issues or special education. We network with them. We visited the tribe. We met with the tribal leaders, right? So in Indigenous Learning Lab project, we are taking this decolonizing approach, which is decolonization is not a mindset, decolonization is not an abstract notion. And the theorists are saying decolonization is about acknowledging and honoring the sovereignty of these nations, right? So we work with them, we explain this process to them, and we never get surprised, these communities who have been at the margin, when you approach them, when you honor their sovereignty, and when you say that, look, we are going to change the system with you, we want to enter the system, open up this system. Once we enter it, because we have the cultural capital as academicians, Andy. And unfortunately, in the United States and around the world, this capital structure for academia is this. Often the academic research is benefiting academicians, right? Academicians get recognition, they get money, they get salary, they get tenure, they get comfortable life, and they can also act like they're morally superior because they care about those poor people, struggling people, they have the moral superiority. And at the end, I ask questions. How do you know? Like in academia, most of our knowledge is not coming from actually real life practices. We often generate knowledge from undergrad students or the schools which is close to us, or we conduct a few interviews and read some books and write some kind of critical elements. We stamp things, we create our own brands, like coin terms. We love those things, right? But for me, the true knowledge should come from our struggles with the communities. So instead of writing about the local communities, instead of writing about teachers, instead of writing about schools, or writing for those communities, we need to work with them, right? Generate knowledge with them. So when we built this kind of network, what we call the social movement, we tried to create this kind of coalitions, right? So we work with these communities, then we work with the Wisconsin American Indian Education Organization. We work with the head of that organization who happened to be also part of that tribe. So once you are in the field, you find these connections. The whole idea is this, Andy. Instead of staying in our offices, staying in our silos, we went outside, right? And it's not easy. I mean, some places we have the cultural capital. Oh, Professor Bao, come on, we can give you those kind of recognition. Some places they don't care about you. And I'm an immigrant. I have an accent. I have a different look than most of the people. So they may just say, who are you? Who cares? I don't care about those things. I wasn't over there about my feelings are going to hurt, my interests. I was over there with the mindset of the social, transformative social movement building, right? You were building those social movements. And once you give that sense to people also, we are not tricking them. We are not deceiving them. We are not going to do a research which is going to benefit the academicians, right? And it's not going to have any kind of real consequences or benefits to the community. Once they understand this is a collective work, people change their attitudes. They come out of this kind of isolations, they become more experimental. But the good thing, Andy, this is the artful part of cultural historical activity theory. I think humans are at best when they are given opportunities to change the context. So those kind of individualistic mindset, right, capitalistic mindset becomes in the behind. And once they are engaged in this kind of future making, once they see that whatever they do over here has consequences in the future, not for themselves, not for their children, but the future of this institution. And there's a chance that their concerns, histories, ideas are going to be systematized, institutionalized. They show their brilliance. They become this collective agency, like this artful notion of the innovation. So as an individual, this is very satisfying. As a scholar, think about it. You are doing something, you are a part of something bigger than you, bigger than your self-interest. My students are coming over there, bigger than their PhD degrees, their academic jobs. They are something bigger than they are, a larger goal. It's more satisfactory. And we work that way. So if we have to learn about quantitative data analysis, we learn qualitative data analysis. We cannot reject anything. We are trying to be more like radical realist, right? To be able to have social change, we do whatever it takes. And our experiments is not the classical stimuli response experiments to see, let's see if it's going to work out, right? We take this one as a social experiment, social movement. So whatever we do will work, should work, has to work. So with that commitment, then things are coming easier, and it presents itself. When you meet with someone, they are just saying, oh, we have this group, right? They have been doing those things. Oh, we have these people. Oh, when you invite the parents, as parents, it turns out they have excellent information and knowledge about systemic organizational transformation, right? No one, unfortunately, in schools, that's my last point, and then I'm going to let you speak. I'm very passionate about this. My last point is this. This system is alienating everyone, right? Putting us against each other, alienating students, African-American students, Latinx students, students with disabilities, students from LGBTQ+ communities, their families, those poor communities. Of course, they are experiencing worse, but also teachers are not happy, administrators not happy, other community members are not happy. So system is alienating us from each other, right? And the system doesn't learn from its own community members. It's very hierarchical, very impersonal, very siloed. Still the factory model, right? Taylorian factory model. So managerial, hierarchical. So administrators are alone at the top, and they are squished between the federal, state regulations, and also local context demands and changes. They are squished, right? And they look at the research. Research is irrelevant. Researchers don't know anything about those kind of real contexts because context is changing. think about our knowledge about systemic change, organizational learning before COVID and after COVID. Who knows about, who has conducted research about doing these interventions during the global pandemic? No one. So administrators, local stakeholders found themselves alone over there, right? So this work creates a platform. Learning Lab is a process through which they come together. They realize their potential and through which they tap into their knowledge, histories, and experiences and innovation, right? So they tap these untapped resources so that the knowledge is going to be more relevant, more ecologically valid, hence the solutions that they develop is going to be adaptive and locally meaningful and transformative. So that's what we are trying to do.
Now, you mentioned that the Learning Lab has its origins in the Change Lab that you learned from Yuri Engstrom's group, and you talked about adapting it to the American context, but it's more than that, isn't it? Could you specifically lay out the way you have changed or transformed the Change Lab model that you learned from Yuri Engstrom?
Of course, of course. So, Andy, this is in 2011, Yuri Engstrom presented this formative intervention. I have been reading his books, and I said, this is amazing. But then again, we need to do some kind of workmanship. You cannot just take and implement. So again, US context, but also my background, the issues I'm seeing, how I have conceptualized the issue, like the social movement. I utilize, for example, Paulo Freire, his pedagogies. And I inspired, again, as I mentioned, the artists like the Theater of Oppressed and Bertolt Brecht's theater, other kind of social movements in sociology, in education. So I brought those elements together. But every school we study, what we do actually is this. We spent at least a year before the intervention, spending time in the school committees, spending time in the school, meeting with those administrators. Along the way, we develop new knowledge, right? It asks us to learn new things. For example, they are saying, oh, we are implementing this model, multi-tier system support. Oh, what is that? Oh, it's coming from the health science, this is and this has this root, and the community has this kind of history, like the colonial effort. For example, we are implementing in urban schools, there are urban rezoning practices, so we need to study geography, critical geography, right? So those things are naturally happening. It's not in my office and thinking about those things. I read widely, right? I bring those elements, but also practice dictates or lead us to bring new knowledge, right?
I don't see the little triangle anywhere in your work.
What do you mean by you don't see the triangle anywhere in your work?
I call it the magic triangle, but that's just being ironic. The famous triangle which Engstrom uses initially to represent his model of an activity system, but then he actually introduces this diagram into the formative intervention, and if like shares this insight, this tool of analysis with the participants. I don't see that with you. Could you explain, is this an accident or why?
No, it's not an accident. And that's following what I said. The local context is leading us to change the interventions. So coming back to the point, in 2012, we implemented Learning Lab. Again, I designed the Learning Lab in my office, but I want to field test. I want to bring that into the practice, and in the practice, improve and change the model, right? So in the first elementary school, this was a suburban school, which is urbanizing, and African-American students were punished severely, more subjectively, and the school was facing very big disproportionality, but they want to change the system. They were implementing also multiple initiatives, academic interventions, behavioral interventions. Schools are complex places, right, Andy? So we went over there. We are looking at all of those things. We are building the community. We were recruiting after-school program coordinator, and school was facing also poverty. This was right after 2008 financial crisis. So several people blue-collar people lost their jobs. and several African American and Latinx community move into this suburban school district or city to find a better job. They were losing their jobs. It was very expensive to live in city. They are moving. So the school was experiencing a big homeless population. Okay. So when we are implementing the learning lab, we did the same model. So in the first, we formed the group. We start with the questioning where they are at. We presented the information about theory, and we introduced the triangle, right? We were informing about the cultural historical activity theory. Then we noticed that that doesn't work. But don't forget, Andy, between each session was taking place once a month. Between each session and before each session, we are having agenda meeting with the leaders, liaisons. So one school leader and one their PBS coach, which is the school's behavioral discipline system coach. They were getting together. We are giving them the agenda. Don't forget, this is our first learning lab. And then we introduced triangle. We noticed that it's not working because it's turning into more didactic things and it's just teaching them some artifact. Then idea again is same idea for me. I noticed that I'm trying to create a cognition before competence, right? Trying to teach them something so that they are going to be aware of this one. So the whole idea came, we were stuck over there, Andy, and it took one academic year. We sustained the group. Group was large also, 30 people, right? They want to include everyone. They want to address racial disproportionality. They want to address the academic combination of the academic, integration of academic and behavioral interventions. They want to increase the school-family collaboration, all of those things. So multiple goals, multiple objectives, and then we were trying to implement that. And we are stuck in this problem identification, Andy. We analyze their transcriptions, video recordings. Don't forget, in interventions, we have 3 videos. We have the video ethnographers, but also ethnographers who are taking notes about our interactions with them. So we studied this one very carefully. So we were studying the students, the learning labs, how they are coming together, how we are facilitating, but also we have a researcher who's studying us, who was studying us. So we conducted these double experiments. So based on that, we are stuck over there, Andy. So group identify all the problems with the system. It was a wonderful group. They were very happy. We had, for example, parents, refugee parents. We have the parents who are experiencing homelessness. We have parents, African-American parents, educated African-American parents. We have the Latinx parents who are working in these blue-collar jobs. We have white parents. We have the social workers. We have the playground attendants, administrators, after-school program coordinators. It was great, but we couldn't move them from problem identification to problem solving, right? In the second iterations, I utilized this model from Volker and Starr. These are anthropologists, information scientists. They are studying the systems and information system and categorization systems. Volker and Starr says that infrastructures are invisible when they are working for you. Like internet is working right now, so you're in Australia, I'm over here. We don't even think about this tool called internet or computer because it's working. It's invisible. So if you're a white person, if you're an able-bodied person in a system which is designed for you, you are not going to notice the infrastructure because it's a disappearing act of infrastructure. That gave me an idea. In the second learning lab, by the way, we are doing these 3 learning labs, elementary school, middle school, and high school simultaneously. But we started elementary school first, then the middle school, then the high school. My idea was that we were going to, each learning lab is going to inform each other. So this is close to what Yuri Engström and colleagues are saying, 4th generation activity theory, multiple activity systems, and they call the multiple interventions, multi-site interventions. So what we learn in the Cole Elementary School, we named them after Michael Cole. So what we learn in the Cole Elementary School inform us in the Rogoff Middle School, okay? When we get there, we were already in the questioning phase. Then we said, why don't we ask them to map out their system? Like they brought their first stimuli, they are talking about their issues. Parent is saying that I have a child who's suspended, no one is calling me. And the teacher is saying that I'm supposed to do this, but I don't have time. And administrators are saying that, you know, you are supposed to do this, but it's not happening. So we developed this model called expansive action called mapping out. So do you remember Yuri Engström has a cycle of change? We start with questioning, analyzing, modeling, examining, implementation plan and actual implementation, reflection and implementation. That's a cycle of change. That's another model. So we expanded that, but based on our analysis, and we noticed that forming a group is an expensive transformative act. Who's going to be in this learning lab? So we add that into cycle of change into Uri Engestrom's model. So our cycle of change starts with forming the group. Then also in the modeling, in between modeling and analyzing, we added another expensive action called mapping out, right? So in the mapping out, we asked the administrators, tell us about your system. How is it supposed to work? And they bring their maps and they said, oh, teachers are supposed to do this, students are acting out, and they are sent to the office, office is doing this. If there are major problems like drug, gang violence, fight, and we involve police, and this is our rules. So, but in the beginning, they noticed that, Andy, they have never mapped out their existing system. So far, we have worked with 11 schools, none of them has mapped out their school system. So administrators had systems living somewhere. The vice principals were doing something else. Teachers had knowing the bits and pieces. Students have some information. Parents have no idea what's going on in the school. System was invisible, right? So that gave us an idea. So we created this mapping out, and that magically move us from problem identification to problem solving. Because what happened actually with the map out, and in the beginning, mapping out was like this. We said that in the Rogoff Middle School, tell us about how your system is supposed to work. This is what they did and did. They brought three circles like this. This is classroom behavioral problems. This is what we do if the referral gets in. This is data we collect, right? This was as simple as this. This is perfectly fine. They brought to the learning lab, and then teachers ask questions, but we do this, and they expanded the model. Then they start to say, oh, we have this exception. If this is happening, this is gonna happen, right? If child is a disability label, then you cannot suspend. Then map got more complicated, each iteration. So mapping out, they expanded the existing system. So they create an artifact. And that's the second stimuli for us. So basically they created the second stimuli, the artifact, which was wonderful because now they have a platform. All of those disparate ideas like no one calls me, I'm the parent. Teacher is saying, I'm supposed to fill out this blue form every time I send my a kid to the office, and that kid is coming. No one is telling me what to do what's going on in the office. I don't know what's going on in the office. That kid's angry. I don't know what to do. I'm supposed to meet with the parents, but I don't have their contact information. Everyone noticed that they know the one side of the system. So they got together, starting with how the system is supposed to work. We didn't reject that idea. That's the interest conversion. And we didn't start with the ideal system. You need to tell us this wonderful system. No, how is it supposed to work? This is supposed to work. And then teacher said, yeah, I'm supposed to do that, but we don't do that. Right? Students are saying, yeah, you are sending us to detention, but no one is checking on us. We don't have to go to the detention office. Then they start to realize that the missing points, shortcuts in the system, but also they realize, and some of the great practices, teacher is saying, well, I'm not supposed to do that. I know, or I'm supposed to do that, but I found a way to connect with the kids much better. Right? I called parents this time. Or we have this administrator who created a wonderful opportunity network. There was an African-American administrator who started Learning Lab, who reached out to us and started Learning Lab, who built a wonderful connection with the African-American community. But no one learned from what he has been doing. He built an amazing relationship. So as they are mapping out the system, we are just saying, can we study what you are doing? So we are studying what he's doing. We are recording and bringing back. So the existing system got complicated, right? These elements, these missing points, these contradictions, these new elements, and they became more visible. Once they map out and understand and develop the greater understanding of the existing system, with all the contradictions, possibilities, challenges, complexities, then we say, okay, this is the platform. This is the artifact, which almost like a magic carpet or some kind of tool, which will help them to move into zone of proximal development. Because the next state is in the modeling. In modeling for us is a future-making utopia. And we tell them, okay, now we are going to do this. After 2 or 3 sessions, they have a good understanding of, greater understanding of the system, right? From the system, from the teacher's point of view, system from the student's point of view. So once they map out the existing system, they have a platform right now. They can hold on to that platform. They are coming from different perspectives. They want to go different directions. They have different ideas, but at least they have a platform, right? Put all of those ideas, material artifact, which includes historical information, which includes institutional information. So we said to them, Andy, at this point, this is the nicest part. You are going to enjoy this. This is the artful part. You have all the power. Don't forget about feasibility at this point. You have all the power in the world. What kind of school you want to be? Like how the school is supposed to be. Like no one asked them, right? Everyone is dealing with those kind of stuff. Tell us about your dreams, hopes. And we formed the small groups, let's say 2, 3 people, like the teacher is working with the administrator and then a parent. They got together and they map out their future. They map out their zone of proximal development per se. Right, that future design utopia, right, their utopia. Here's the deal though, Andy. So some groups use the existing system map. By the way, we print out those system maps as handouts, but also we create it as posters. Each iterations of the system created as the posters because we want to give them that concrete. And we don't have to, we didn't tell them to use the existing system, by the way. But some people use the existing system. Other people create the list of things they want to see. Every time when we come to school, we want to feel welcomed, right? And someone is saying, everyone is going to be successful. Those are dreams. Some people generated, some group generated very complex systemic maps, right? So that's the modeling. So forming the group, questioning, historical empirical analysis, mapping out, then modeling, right? The utopia. So they come together, 3 versions of the future now, right? And some people utilize the existing system map, which is a secondary artifact, and in the they engage in almost like a tertiary artifact, right? Meaning that they are now thinking about the artful way of imagining the future beyond the constraints of their context. Do you understand what I'm saying? So almost like a stepping stone. So they hold on to that artifact. They are moving to new, but they are still pulling and pushing, right? There are different directions. There are 3 artifacts now, ideal, imaginary, utopian system. The next, we put them together, right? We formed a subcommittee, 3 to 4 people from the Learning Lab. They got together, they work on this one. And our research team is transcribing the data, presenting data to them. This is what you discussed. These are the artifacts we are facilitating. And don't forget, Andy, we are providing childcare. We were providing interpretation and translation. We are providing food, which is very important. And we were paying stipends to those people, yet still cheaper than the other education interventions, because school has resources and people have lots of interest in this one. Anyway, so they designed those ideal maps, Andy. Then they formed this a subcommittee, put them together into one version. So this map turned into future map. So new page, right? But it has the elements of the working elements. The next one, we say, okay, now let's think about the implementation or feasibility of this work. What would it take for you to do this, right? And again, this ideal map actually, the zone of proximal development already occupied somehow. They knew the constraints, right? When they give them the blank page, tabula rasa, they didn't come up with some kind of utopic stuff. Some did. They were also grounded by this kind of reality, right? You don't have to tell people, deceive people. They know that. So they are like, oh, we have to do this. We have these classrooms, but we can't do that. And teachers were saying, oh, we cannot do that. But how about this? To be able to do this kind of restorative justice practices, we need training. Oh, that needs money. And the administrator is saying, oh, district is having some kind of grant. We can utilize that money. And meanwhile, for example, we start to intervene also more. For example, I'm a teacher educator. I'm at the local university, and I said, we place our student teachers in your schools. They can be some resources for you. Or I'm just saying in our university, we have this kind of training opportunity. That's a free training that can come over here. So we are a part of that group. So as they are moving problem identification, the problem solving, they are also generating this collective agency. So individual communities, individual fishes are coming and becoming school of fish. and they start to move. And we start to observe the collective agency, Andy. So it's not Andy's suggestion anymore. It's Andy and Aydin are coming up something, right? So at the end, the system, new artifact, belongs to all of them, right? Belongs to all of them. So they develop the ownership. Now they notice the parents, African-American parents who have horrible histories and experience with the school, because often they are marginalized, they are excluded from decision-making, right? Their voices are not heard, or their experiences are devalued. Or when they come to school, people want to hear the horrible stuff from them. So they have to share their pains and suffering so that they can be recognized as real human beings. We didn't want that. They are equal members, right? They have wealth of resources, they have wealth of information, and they are the riders of the future maker of that school. Once they realize that this is that kind of project, they develop the ownership. So they didn't need us at that point. They were pushing us. When are we meeting? Can we do this? Can we do that? So they generated, and we started to just move back a little bit. And they were asking us, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? They didn't even need us. They were suggesting us, can we meet afterward? How about these students? We need more students. And they recruited more students. And so they were questioning even the membership of the Learning Lab. And after that, we said, okay, toward the end, develop an implementation plan, because this is going to be concrete. They developed an implementation plan, which includes presenting this new system to the whole school community and getting their feedback and adapting that artifact. So that artifact becomes more adaptive and living artifact. Not a dead artifact, living artifact. It's not frozen. So what they were thinking, we need to reach out to community, create the increasing understanding and buy-in. So we need to present this to staff and get their feedback. Based on their feedback, we can change. We need to present this one to students, right? There are some students group. We can present this new system to get their feedback and improve the system. And in the others, right before the school semester starts in the United States, in September it starts, there's a professional development weeks in schools. They said those iterations, different versions of the maps and new version is going to present to the whole school community, parents, students, and teachers, and it's going to start being implemented. That's it, Andy. So that's what we have been doing.